Hello, everyone, and welcome to our study webinar about grief, specifically anticipatory grief and ambiguous grief. For those of you who are watching this recording, it might seem a little bit chopped up. We had some technical difficulties with the live webinar, so Lorien and I are here re-recording the first 5 minutes or so, and then the screen might change a little bit. You'll see a little bit different view for the rest of the webinar, so if it seems a little bit choppy, that's why. But welcome, Lorien, back to the webinar. Thank you for being with me here today. All right, my name is Lisa, and I work in marketing, and I help manage the community here at Steady. Lorien is one of our amazing advocates. We're going to get into what a Steady advocate is here in just a minute, but one of the things that she is more of an expert on is this topic and grief specifically. Lorien, if you don't mind, can you just give our audience a little bit of your personal background with caregiving and who you've cared for and how you entered this space to begin with?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So I have been with Study for about 2 years now, and I think it's the best thing ever. I love it. As far as my background before Study goes, I have a little over a decade of experience as a CNA, spanning a lot of different settings like hospitals, nursing homes, and predominantly home health care. So I've been very fortunate to get to be a part of hundreds and hundreds of people's journeys. And then personally, I stepped in as the primary caregiver for my grandmother as she went through brain cancer and then subsequently heart issues and all sorts of health conditions. And now I also do what I can to help with my other grandmother who experienced a stroke and has dementia and lives with my parents about an hour away from me. In addition to being a CNA, I have a background in social work
Yeah.
and have really delved into, I started taking coursework on grief um, in 2022 after losing my grandmother, and it kind of revolutionized my world. I feel like it is so important to acknowledge as a universal human experience, I
Yeah.
think. I'm really passionate. Everybody thinks it's probably kind of strange when I'm like, I love talking about grief, but here we are. I think it is really important to get into. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Yeah, well, we're grateful to have you here, and we're grateful for all of the time that you've put into researching and studying this topic and just kind of experiencing it through both your personal and professional background. One of the things that I know we'll get into here in a little bit is just how society in general has kind of a certain I don't know even what to call it, but certain perspective around grief where we all feel like we have to do it a certain way or have to move through it at a certain speed. And what we know now is that that's just not true, but that has left us all with what does this look like? What's it supposed to feel like? What are we supposed to do with it? So we're really excited to get into this topic with you today. First of all, what I kind of want to set you up for is you have taught me about multiple types of grief. A lot of us think about grief as just when you are mourning the loss of someone, but we know that that's not the only type of grief. We talk about anticipatory, and in a little bit, we're going to talk about ambiguous grief. But can you start with anticipatory grief and just kind of tell us what that is and what that looks like?
Yeah, anticipatory grief, especially in the caregiving space, is super common. It's something that we encounter as soon as a loss feels like it's on the horizon. So, as soon as you get that diagnosis or you start to see changes in your loved one, a lot of times that begins to trigger that sense of loss.
Mhm.
And in addition to just the overarching sense of mortality that you can experience with that, there are so many little losses that can pile up along the way, like loss of independence, loss of future plans or hopes for the future, or for your relationships, or, in caregiving, it can be a loss of cognition or a change in routines and just all the cumulative grief that you can experience in that. A
Yeah.
lot of the times it's thought that our bodies kind of go through anticipatory grief as a means of protection.
Yeah.
Maybe if we start grieving now, then maybe it'll soften the blow when we do experience the eventual big loss. And sometimes that can happen. I think sometimes it can make things a little bit easier. I think sometimes that's really not true at all. We can experience the whole gamut when it comes to emotions and experiences with grief.
Mhm.
And in addition to that, a lot of the time within this space, you can experience a sense of paradoxical grief where maybe you've been losing your person piece by piece, which is really what anticipatory grief is, just those little pieces all the time. But if something happens and everything snowballs, they get sick, they get injured, something happens where you just lose them really rapidly at the end of a long disease, then you can kind of experience anticipated sudden death
Mm.
where it hits all the harder.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really hard to predict.
Yeah.
Just can't. Um, as a study advocate, which being a study advocate means that you get to meet one-on-one with caregivers who are experiencing all different stages of their caregiving journey. If somebody comes and talks to you about different feelings, it's probably not likely that they're going to say, I'm experiencing anticipatory grief, right? But what does that look like in them that helps you say, these are some red flags that there might be some grief going on here that we can work through or address?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's a lot of anything that feels kind of out of the ordinary can be a pointer to grief. A lot of the time, what I end up seeing happen in people is they find themselves with a little bit of a short fuse where they feel frustrated with their loved one, feel like they're losing their patience. And they might even, that frustration can even start as being like, you should be able to do this. And I think a lot of us start in that place with dementia. Um, but just it can look like sadness, it can look like anger, it can look like irritability, depression. Maybe you have brain fog and difficulty concentrating.
Mm.
Uh, or if you're feeling like you can isolate yourself or kind of withdraw from things. Physical exhaustion is another aspect of that, or even spiritually, maybe you're angry
Yeah.
towards your higher power. Maybe you are having a crisis of faith. Maybe you're leaning in. But I think it can really manifest in a number of ways. And I think any of the feelings that people have that are a little bit um, out of the ordinary realm of how they might feel, those can point towards grief. And I think one of the benefits of having a study advocate is even having someone who can sit and look when you're saying like I shouldn't be feeling this way,
Mm-hmm.
point out, you know, I think what you're going through right now is grief.
Yeah.
I think being able to have that acknowledgement in that space that what I'm feeling is normal. I'm not crazy. I'm not just flying off the handle.
Yeah.
I think is that can be really helpful in developing self-compassion there.
Yeah. Thanks. I want to make sure that I mention for anyone who's watching, throughout this webinar, Lorien's going to give a lot of information about grief, but you keep hearing us refer back to Steady, the company that we both work for. It is a completely free service for caregivers. So when we get to that point at the end of the webinar, I'll talk about how to sign up, but matching and talking to someone about your grief or your challenges or anything you're facing in your caregiving journey right now is completely free. And grief is one of those topics that our advocates are very well versed on talking about. So I want to continue our conversation about anticipatory and ambiguous grief. Right now, we're really focused on this anticipatory grief, and how a caregiver might start to think about losses before what society tells us is an actual loss. If you are talking to a caregiver and they're kind of spilling their guts to you a little bit about anticipatory grief, even if they don't have the verbiage for that, what are some of the things that you're noticing in them? What are some of the symptoms? What are some of that? What does that look like in somebody?
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge that it can manifest in a lot of different ways. A lot of times, I think we just think of grief as sadness. And we don't necessarily acknowledge that it can come about. You can have emotional symptoms. You can be angry or irritable. Um, you can be sad. You can be depressed. You can
Mm-hmm.
be forgetful or have a hard time concentrating. You might want to isolate or withdraw from
Mm-hmm.
others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes it's self isolation. Sometimes other people kind of pull away because it's hard to deal with these things.
Mm-hmm.
Physical exhaustion can really also magnify all of this. And
Mm-hmm.
you can have some spiritual things come up. Like maybe you're angry with your higher power, or you're having a crisis of faith, or you're leaning into your faith. Maybe you're searching for signs in the midst of everything.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. If you're talking to a caregiver and you've kind of helped them identify that they might be experiencing some of this anticipatory grief, what are some of the first steps that you take with that caregiver to kind of address those emotions and those symptoms?
I think it kind of depends on what people are encountering. I think a lot of the time, what I hear most often from people is they feel like they have a short fuse and they're losing patience with their person, which a lot of the times that ends up spiraling. It ends up looking like guilt, feeling like they shouldn't feel that way, and like they should have more patience. And so, as a result of that, if we're looking at something that way, one of the things that I like to do is just acknowledge that they're experiencing grief,
Mm-hmm.
that space to be able to talk about it. Because I think that's the most important thing we can do is just be able to sit in it and be able to process it. I think also it is so important to have grace in the space.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really key to understand I'm not losing my patience with my person because I'm a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to feel this guilt about
Mm-hmm.
however I'm reacting to something. If I allow myself the space to understand what I'm going through, then that'll allow me to show up better. But it's
Mm-hmm.
okay if I don't show up perfectly every time because it's all a journey and there are a lot of losses involved.
Mm-hmm. What about, and I know that every caregiver, their relationship with the person they're caring for can be very unique. I know we have a lot of caregivers here at Steady who the person they're caring for is a spouse or a parent or somebody who they have just been very close to and very in love with for their whole life. And then as that person starts to experience a decline, I know the caregiver often experiences a lot of sadness and fear and grieving that relationship, even before the person passes away. You talked a little bit about dealing with like frustration and short fuses, but what about addressing like just really deep sadness or fear?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question and it's really valid.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we face within this grief space is a transition of roles or kind of a shift of roles. So instead of maybe a spousal relationship or like a parent-child relationship, you're shifting a lot more into caregiver and care recipient relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I think as you're experiencing that, it's really important to be able to approach things with intentionality so that, first of all, allowing yourself space to feel sad. If you need to go take a bath and cry into it, please do
Mm-hmm.
that, whatever's going to feel good. But also finding ways of saying, okay, I'm going to find room to be able to have my old relationship. I maybe it feels like day in and day out, we just have to be in this caregiving situation, but how can I seize a moment so that I can still have my relationship with my person? And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look the same, but it can still be very meaningful. Like if you want to do something looking at photo albums together or eating with my grandmother, sometimes we just go for a drive and we have some ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
talk, it's not the same, but it's really special to be able to just take that intentional moment and say, we don't have to just be in this hard space. We're going to go find some joy in this.
Yeah. Okay, I'm cheating a little bit because you have taught me about continuing bonds, and it sounds a little bit like that might be a continuing bond type strategy. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and I think for everyone here, continuing bonds is one of my favorite grief theories. I think that it's really, really important and special to be able to incorporate continuing bonds and recognize that no matter what things look like, whether our person is here and what capacity they have, or whether they're gone, our relationship with them continues.
Mm-hmm.
So that can look like a number of things. Like you may look at photo albums. Maybe there's someone who loves a certain kind of music. You can listen to that music or play that music. You can, if they have a favorite recipe, make that favorite recipe. Or if they have a hobby that they enjoyed, maybe you can either find ways to modify that and do that with them, or you can find ways to engage on your own with that. But it's basically continuing bonds, or you can write them a letter.
Mm-hmm.
We really are coming at it at different stages. But just finding ways of leaning into your relationship and what has made it special.
Yeah, I love that. I always like to tell this story. So my grandma passed away about 12 years ago, and she had Alzheimer's, and I was very close to her. And one of the memories that my family holds on to is her Thanksgiving turkey recipe. It's like the turkey and stuffing, and it's still in her handwriting, and it's on this like frail notebook paper that we keep to the side, but we pull it out every Thanksgiving. One year, my brother, for a gift from my mom, blew it up really big, and it's hanging on the kitchen wall now. And so that's just a really cool continuing bonds thing. You mentioned recipe, and I always feel more connected to her around Thanksgiving time because of that. So.
I love that. And I think it can be really like anything. Like one of my things is my grandmother I lost. She always tried to tell jokes, but she's
Uh-huh.
bad at it. So her one of the jokes that always pops in my head is like, she's like, what happens when a duck flies upside down? His quack goes up. And she just burst out laughing. It's supposed to be he quacks up. Funny. And she's like, I didn't think so either. So
Yeah.
in my brain, if I say his quack goes up.
Yep. I feel like that's a really humanizing way to think about just continuing bonds with your loved one and really like sort of heavy and sometimes really dark moments is to be able to say it's okay to laugh at these things or whatever. I think that's a beautiful part of that continuing bonds process for a caregiver. Okay, so if anticipatory grief is really you're still caring for your loved one, but you're grieving the relationship that you had with them or parts of your life that have changed, what makes that different? Or maybe just define ambiguous grief for us and how is that different?
Yeah, I think especially in the dementia realm, the two really go hand in hand.
Hmm.
Ambiguous grief looks like having the person still be physically here,
Hmm.
but maybe they're not psychologically, emotionally, relationally present due to their condition. It may not feel like a clear loss. Um,
Hmm.
and it may look like, as we were talking about, like your relationship roles flip. So you're
Hmm.
navigating that new situation. Um, and it doesn't mean you love your person any less. Your love is still there, but you can really miss who they were.
Hmm.
As far as the difference between the two, anticipatory is really grieving the future loss of your person.
Hmm.
The ambiguous is really grieving the past version of this person.
Gotcha.
And I think it's really important to acknowledge with both of them that these are types of losses that are often disenfranchised. So it's
Yeah.
not things that society does a good job of recognizing.
Yeah. Um, and that's a lot of times where we have caregivers come to us saying things like, I should be doing more. I should be feeling this. I should be over it. I should not be so sad. When And a lot of that, I think, is from how we've all been brought up in society to think that grief is something to avoid, to stay away from, or to get through as quickly as possible. What would you tell a caregiver who is in that mindset of, we call it shoulding yourselves, don't should yourself, that they should be doing or they should not be doing something?
I mean, the only way over it is through it. And I think it's important to acknowledge that you're never actually going to get over something. So with grief, it just becomes how you incorporate it into your life.
Mhm,
I think that that's a lot of the time. If you don't address your grief, it's going to come out in other ways.
mhm,
I'm sure a lot of us have experienced that either ourselves or with other people, and it comes out sideways a lot of the time. So,
mhm.
as an advocate, if somebody's doing that, I'm going to be like, nope,
Yeah,
you have space, you have grace for everything. You are not allowed to do that. You
yeah.
are allowed to feel how you feel. It is real
Mhm,
and it deserves attention.
mhm. I think finding grace for yourself and accepting that emotion is a really good first step. I know a lot of people are living a reality where even if it feels like they can't get out of bed in the morning or because they're grieving so heavily, or um, they're not feeling themselves at work, they don't feel as sharp or on top of things or as capable, or things are falling behind in the house and they're maybe tying that to, well, I'm just so sad, or I'm grieving. Are there sort of strategies to be able to hold that grief but still be able to do what you need to do to function in your day-to-day life? What would you tell somebody?
I think a lot of the time when we feel like things are insurmountable, it's because what we're approaching is insurmountable. And
Yeah.
so it's important, instead of looking at this whole big thing that's in front of you, to be able to step back and say, you mentioned it's hard to even get out of bed in the morning. And so if you're in a position like that, being able to break it down to as small of steps as possible to be able to address what you need to keep going, like
Mhm,
getting out of bed, putting
mhm,
on your socks,
mhm,
very, very small steps. And I think it's important in all of as we're caregivers, we're here 24/7. We don't get to really take off that role regardless of what our situation is with our loved one. It's important to be able to build into your routine. I know study has like a caregiver checklist, things to
mhm,
take care of yourself.
mhm,
And so, whatever it looks like, I think it's really important to try to find small rituals
mhm,
within things that can be supportive. Um, Even taking deep breaths, lighting a candle for your ambiance, um, having a drink of water, or
mhm,
whatever it looks like. Give yourself something. I think it can be helpful to have something to look forward to,
mhm,
something to take care of yourself. So even if you're saying, I only have 5 minutes,
mhm.
whatever that looks like, use that 5 minutes and approach it with intentionality so that you can build in space for you. I think that's really important to do in the journey.
Yeah. A lot of times, it sounds really trite to say self-care or just take care of yourself or build in time to take care of yourself. And I know we get a lot of people that say, yeah, then you don't understand caregiving because there is no time. One of a friend of study, um, uh, has mentioned that this is Sally, that one of her go-to things is to walk outside. If it's safe to leave the person that you're caring for, is just to put that 5 minutes on your calendar of this 5 minutes while they're napping or while they're doing an activity, to just go outside and take those deep breaths, or walk outside barefoot and have your feet touch the earth and take those deep breaths. And even those 5 minutes of like you time can be grounding and recentering. And it's not a vacation, it's not a spa day, but it's something that brings your nervous system back down. I also recently had a friend going through some things and we're trying to figure out how to support her. And one thing that she specifically asked us for was, can you please text me every day and see if I've eaten and if I'm drinking water because I keep forgetting to eat. Like, I thought that was a really neat way for her to ask for help and support.
Yeah. And I think that's something where we would wish in this world that people would be asking us what our needs are. But I think that it's really important. I want caregivers to feel empowered to express what their needs are.
Mhm.
You are not a burden. You're not too much. You deserve to be cared for. And so, even if it is like, hey, I need you to send me a text or something like that, that's a really important thing. And along with that, what you're saying of stepping outside for 5 minutes, I like
Mhm.
to bring up because it feels like we don't even have 5 minutes a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But recognizing, is the world going to end? If you
Mhm.
step outside for 5 minutes and kind of allowing yourself space to prioritize, this is something I do need to make sure I'm keeping up with this, but this is something where the world's not going to end if I don't address it. And
Yeah.
I'm going to be able to approach it better, fill my cup, and do okay if I can do X before I walk into anything. And maybe I'll even be faster and more productive at other things if I give myself this space.
Yeah, yeah, prioritizing. Okay, the house hasn't been vacuumed in a couple of weeks, and I used to do it every week. Then it's kind of like the so what theory. So what if it goes a third week, a fourth week? Like, so what? Or is that something that you can delegate to somebody else?
Mm-hmm.
You bring up a good point, especially around grief. Talking about how kind of society has conditioned us to stay away from it, to treat it like we're walking on eggshells sometimes. A lot of people who are grieving have people around them who want to support and help, but don't know how to offer that. I'm going to ask you kind of two questions here. One is for the person who is deep in grief, do you have any strategies for them to most simply express their needs or ask for help, or how would they go about doing that to the people who are closest to them?
I think that it can be really individual and it's a little bit, we go through phases. So, first of all, allowing yourself to be different places at different times because we will have waves of things. And you are going to know best for yourself, okay, do I like connecting with people when I'm in this place, or do I prefer to isolate?
Mhm.
And if either one of those is true, kind of, especially if you have like a short list of trusted people, being able to let them know, like you were saying with your friend, like, can you please check on me?
Mhm.
Or, asking someone if they can make a meal train or something like that. I think sometimes also when we're in this space of wanting to isolate, if that's where we are, then sometimes a strategy for yourself can be um, finding, understanding your buckets of friends
Sure.
and knowing, like, okay, these are people I can go to for this. These are people I can go to for this. Sometimes we want to be able to say, I wish this person did this and I wish I could force them to do this. And that's not always going to, it's not likely going to work.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think being able to realize what your different buckets of people are going to be helpful with, and maybe it's big things, maybe it's small things, and sometimes leaning into your soft connections is going to be what's most helpful. So if you go to church or you go to the grocery store or something, and just or coffee shop, just saying hi to
Mhm.
somebody, having a little bit of human connection, but
Mhm.
having to get into things and getting to walk away, I think that can be really important too.
I feel like that might be a really good strategy for people who don't want to be an open book. They don't want to sit and talk through their grief in great detail, but just smiling and practicing normal conversation with somebody who doesn't know what's happening can be probably pretty life-giving.
Yeah. Yeah, getting to be separate from your grief is sometimes almost just as important as leaning into it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take you down another kind of road before I ask the second part of that question, but I know that a lot of people experience um, guilt sometimes that they've grieved too fast, or they're back at work too fast, or that they're trying to get things off their mind, and sometimes that can feel almost like they're not doing their loved one enough justice. How would you approach that guilt feeling with a caregiver?
First of all, I want to say that it's totally normal if you feel relief,
Yeah.
especially I think that's something that we experience a lot within anticipatory grief is like a lot of times we say things like, oh, I just want this to be over. And we don't necessarily mean, I always want to point out to people within that we don't necessarily mean like we want our person to die. We want them, like,
Yeah.
want our lives back. What we mean is like, we wish this wasn't what it is.
Yeah.
And we're grieving our old relationship. But to your point of if someone is moving on, a lot of times people feel like they're not grieving properly. And that can be a whole span of things. Either they're spending too long or they're not feeling the feelings that they thought they were going to feel. I think that happens all the time. Every single loss is different and is different for every individual. And so understanding that really any emotion is normal. But within that, you and I have talked about how there are really different coping styles that can come up within grieving. You can have emotional, you can have creative, and I think what you're pointing to is more rational. And
Yeah.
a lot of the time, you have people where they're going in, they're taking action, and maybe that means you're clearing out the closet, you're taking care of all of that. You're learning more about things. You're project oriented. You have a to-do list, get things done. Let's move on. And that's still a way of processing. And so I think it's just so important to acknowledge that
Hmm.
whatever you're doing,
Hmm.
it's normal. There's a reason why you're doing that. As long as you are allowing yourself that space, that's
Yeah.
really okay. Just guilt's not okay. We can work on that one.
Yeah. Well, and what you referred to with the and remind me the coping styles. I know you said there's creative, emotional, and
Action.
rational, and you just went into the rational, the taking action a little bit. Lorien has put together an amazing workbook for anyone experiencing grief that has some ideas for how to funnel your energy in those three ways, depending on where your energy is going. It also has some really good and normalizing mantras to hold on to. It has some journal prompts. We talked about continuing bonds. It has some instructions on how to do that. That is sheerly a free resource that everybody in this webinar, everybody who's registered for this webinar is going to get as soon as we wrap up this portion. But I just really encourage people to look at that workbook, not as necessarily okay, I have to start at page 1 and go all the way through, but really understanding that everybody grieves differently, everybody experiences these things differently. So as you're looking through that, take the parts that that resonate with you and that make you feel better, and leave the parts that don't, because everybody is gonna be a little bit different. Okay, back to what I was going to ask you. Finding simple ways for a caregiver to ask for help is one thing, but for anybody in our audience who's supporting someone who is grieving, what are ways that we can extend help in ways that will land well with somebody who's grieving?
The best thing you can do is sit with someone.
Yeah.
I think keeping that in mind, and you can ask people what is going to feel best for them.
Yeah.
If they, or even what about the person, maybe they can't ask for what they need. And
Mhm.
if you show up and you do the vacuuming,
Yeah.
that will help. And I think a lot of the time doing simple, practical things can really make a big difference. I think it's really important to acknowledge, as we were talking about at the beginning, grief doesn't just last a day. It's not just the week of a funeral. And so taking care of your grieving friends, understanding, grief is happening now during caregiving, it'll keep happening, and just continuously offering that space, saying, I'm going to sit with you.
Mhm.
What do you need? How can
Mhm.
I show up?
Yeah.
Just, or bring them coffee, bring them whatever, their favorite comfort thing is, and just do that. Or, as a caregiver, I think one of the number one things I hear from people that I'm sure a lot of people can relate with in here is like, it would be game changing if someone came and sat with their person for just a couple of hours
Mhm.
so that they can get out. So,
Yeah.
anybody who's not a caregiver, I think if you can go, or if your caregiving journey's in a different stage. Like for me, I'm not actively caregiving all the time. And
Mhm.
so if I can go and I can offer my time to someone and I
Yeah.
can be there for an afternoon, and they can go if they want to go like collapse somewhere and read a book, do
Yeah.
nothing,
Yeah.
whatever it
Go
looks
to their bedroom in the same house and take a nap, but know that
like.
loved one is safe. Yeah.
Yeah, but just showing up. I think that it's important to acknowledge that you just it doesn't you can't really like showing up is not the wrong choice. Like I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. I think anybody who's concerned that maybe they've already misstepped and they've missed an opportunity, there's
Mhm.
still opportunities. You can go, you can still show up. It's not too late. Ask people about their person.
That's a good one. Go into that more. Yeah.
I think that's so important because I think whether our person is here or not, a lot of the time, especially in the realm of dementia, people start acting like they're not here anymore. We don't talk about it. And I think that that's such a terrible thing because they are still here. They're people, or even if they're not, they're people. They matter. Your relationship matters. And I think it's really important to be able to hold that complexity, understanding grief and joy can coexist. You
Mhm.
can sit in bittersweetness or melancholy, and just offering that space, saying, and along the same lines, if they want to say, like, this sucks, or
Yeah.
like, I'm really mad about this situation, or I actually like I never had the relationship that I wanted, grieving the losses of things that you never got. You never got an apology for change behavior, just allowing space for all of it.
Yeah.
I think is really, really important.
Yeah. It almost sounds like if you boil it down, in that specific scenario, it would be a really good and normal question to ask someone who's grieving. Would it feel good to tell me a story about them? Would it feel good to talk about them? Or would it feel better? Do you not want to talk about it right now? And give them the choice. And then if you are grieving and it feels weird because you do want to talk about it, I think that's also a normal question to ask a friend. You talked about the buckets, like pick a friend in the emotional support bucket and say, can I just reflect on stories? Can we just like talk about happy memories? Because that would bring me a lot of joy right now. I think just asking that simple question is a really good way to take action on some of this. Okay. We specifically with I've got a couple more things I want to get through. With ambiguous grief, we've talked about maybe you're not, or maybe I have this backwards, but maybe you're not grieving a person, but you're grieving um, lost opportunity. I know there are a lot of young caregivers out there in their 20s and 30s that end up in a role they never thought they'd be in with a parent. And they're grieving the loss of what their professional life could have been. Maybe their dating life, maybe something like that. Or somebody had to pass up a job because it didn't work with their caregiving duties. Um, how would somebody identify that as grief, and how would you help them through that as an advocate?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that is really valid. It is all kind of grief. I think just a lot of the time that is what I hear from people. I think that caregivers are so often, we have caregiving types here at Study. Um, and we so often get people who come in who are sacrificial caregivers.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times people who are coming in, we're all people pleasers. We all jump in without a second thought. Not everybody. I think there's sometimes we're thrust into it when we really don't want to, and we're just doing the best we can with it. But I think just being able um to acknowledge, yeah, like what am I missing out on by
Mm.
being in this position? And recognizing like this is totally valid. And maybe even sometimes it looks like, okay, how do I try to find balance so that I'm not giving up what feels like all of me to care?
Mhm. Mhm.
I think sometimes it looks like finding the space to be able to talk about like I lost this and this and this, all the cumulative loss that you're talking about. As well as saying, okay, is there space? Like, can I find a respite care grant, or can I find, something where I can find something that's going to fill my cup, where I can be me, uh,
Mm.
or whatever that looks like. And so acknowledging all of the losses, but maybe making space for what things can look like as well.
Yeah, going back to what you were talking about of like prioritizing, maybe I can't do it all because of my situation as a caregiver, but can I pick one that's most important and can I find a way to take a small step toward that? Keep working on that skill, keep up on that hobby, whatever that looks like. That's good. You've talked to me about this kind of visual of how caregivers end up straddling timelines. Then how that kind of relates to grief. Do you want to explain that kind of analogy to us?
Yeah, I think that we end up in a place as caregivers, like you said, of straddling timelines, and it's really, really hard to be in the present. A lot
Yeah.
of time we might have fear for the future and the unknown, or we might even be saying, like, this is only temporary. I don't have to do this forever. But a lot of the time it's also we're in this place of mourning the past, which I think a lot of caregivers can relate to. Kind of, if only I could go back to when I first thought this was bad.
Yeah.
And I think, we get so caught up in those cumulative piece by piece everyday losses where we never know when we're going to experience a last thing with our person, or when a new behavior is going to come up. So I think it can even put you in a little bit of survival mode.
Yeah.
Um, but just I it's hard when you can kind of snowball with like, oh, but now there's this new loss that I have to face. And it's
Mhm.
super normal to be in that position of like, especially not knowing every single thing again is totally unique. So not knowing what it's going to look like moving forward. So trying to find that space where we're not just saying like, man, I wish I could go back to this. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's a really hard thing, but I think if you can recognize that you're in that place of like, I'm stuck, I don't know where I am in space or time, and finding moments to kind of savor where you're at,
Mhm.
and being open to a new kind of relationship where you are now can be really important. Like maybe, um speaking again of like continuing bonds, those can shift over time where, um maybe at first you can reminisce with people and you can do hobbies and activities with them. Then maybe later it looks like I like making them laugh or eating ice cream or things like that. And then maybe later it looks like you just hold hands and
Yeah.
listen to their heartbeat or something. But finding those moments where you can savor where you're at, I think is a way we can try to ground ourselves in the present, in the midst of being thrown between the future and the past.
Yeah. And just remembering that what you're doing right now is really important work. It's changing the life of someone else, even though your life has also been changed, and just holding on to those little moments in the present of this is a memory that I can come back to and remember fondly rather than just having this large chunk of time where we're not going to have any good memories because I'm mourning the past and dreading the future. That makes a lot of sense. Um, as we wrap this up a little bit, I'm going to kind of go back and summarize what we've talked about. If you are listening in live, feel free to drop any questions for Lorien here in the chat, and I will be able to see those and get those questions over to her. And then I'm also going to take just a couple of minutes to show how Steady, which is a completely free resource to any caregivers, can be a really crucial support to somebody who is grieving at any point in their grieving timeline. But for anybody who kind of joined late, Lorien has been talking about the difference between anticipatory grief and ambiguous grief, how grief can show up in a lot of ways that sometimes we don't expect. And really, I think, Lorien, I want to thank you for normalizing all of this and really assuring our audience that no matter how their grief is showing up, if it's anger or a short fuse or not being able to get out of bed or deep sadness or wanting to talk about your loved one or wanting to avoid it, it's all normal. There isn't a right way to do this. And it's also okay that no matter how you're experiencing this, to boil it down to really small, actionable steps, to take what feels good and ignore what doesn't. So many of those strategies are going to be in the workbook that Lorien put together for us that everybody will get after this webinar. So I think that'll be just a really great resource. And then just remembering to stay in the present and try to find little glimmers of time for yourself, time to invest in yourself, but also time with your loved one that you can reflect back on. And Lorien shared a lot of really, really good strategies with us today. So really grateful for you and your insight and your knowledge on this topic.
I'll have to talk about grief glimmers sometime. That's a good thing too.
Okay. Well, that's also a good point. We're going to be doing another one of these webinars, talking more about the identity crisis that caregivers experience. And we're going to go in a little bit more in depth into what we were just talking about toward the end, when you do feel like you're losing out on other life opportunities with career or relationships or hobbies, whatever that might be, and how to navigate that identity shift into caregiving, whether you are expecting it or not. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here and talk a little bit about Steady. So Steady is a free resource for anyone who is caring for an aging or a sick loved one. What we do here is we match caregivers with what we call a caregiver advocate. Lorien is one of our caregiver advocates. All of our advocates have two things in common. One, they have personal experience with caregiving. You heard Lorien talk about both of her grandmothers. We understand that when you are a caregiver, sometimes the best person for you to connect with is someone who has been in your shoes and understands what you're going through on some level. So that is one thing that all of our advocates have. And the other thing that they have is some sort of professional background or training in a mental health, emotional health, or behavioral health field. A lot of them social work and nursing, psychology, things like that. So that it's really kind of twofold. They're coming with their personal and professional training. And then the other thing that we do here at Steady is we understand that every person is different. That means every caregiver is different. You heard Lorien talk about caregiving styles. She mentioned sacrificial style. We kind of categorize people into 9 different main styles of caregiving and how they approach it. But there are a lot of sub-styles in there, right? A lot of flair that people can add to their caregiving approach. And all of our advocates are trained to approach your caregiving journey in a really personal way. If you're an action-oriented person and your energy takes you to wanting to go and do and solve problems, we're going to go with that flow, not against it. We're going to recognize that strength and also talk about what you might be avoiding and help you slow down. If you're on the opposite end and you don't want to get out of bed, we're going to go with it. And then we're going to help build strategies that makes life a little bit more approachable and things like that. So that's what we mean by these personalized pathways. And then we're building a supportive community. The more people who join at Steady, the more caregivers there are to interact with. And kind of our private digital community. We share resources there. Lorien's workbook will be there. This webinar will be there. We have a lot of caregiver checklists and practices and just conversations going on in there, so that caregivers feel less isolated and less alone. So that's really what Steady is. Lorien, did I miss anything on that you would add?
No, I mean, I think I think you gave a good overview. Like we said, it's really by caregivers for caregivers. And it is just when I say that I am so honored to share this space. And I know like I have a few of you have me as your advocate.
Mhm.
I just love being here. I love getting to share this space with you. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. There's a QR code up on the screen that will take you to study and allow you to sign up and match with an advocate. I do believe we're on just a little bit of a wait list right now, so I would really encourage you to go over there and put your name on it so that as soon as we have capacity open up again, we will contact you. We don't expect that to be long. And then just like you see in this picture, you'll be able to video chat with your own advocate, kind of like Lorien, or message them through our platform and communicate through the community. So if you're interested in that, scan that QR code or go to steady.com. Please share this with your caregiver friends and community. There is no criteria about the level of caregiving you're doing. You don't have to live with your person, though you certainly can. You could be caring from afar. This is really just a support service to make sure that you don't feel alone and like you're having to figure out all of this by yourself. So if you've registered for this webinar, we will follow up with an email where you have access to this recording, the workbook, and a button to take you right to study and sign up. So appreciate you all being here. Lorianne, really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll let you all go.